How I accidentally crashed a dinner party, got caught in a web of old grudges, and realized I wasn't who they thought I was, but couldn't escape the drama anyway. So this happened last night, and I still can't wrap my head around it. My husband, Matt, and I recently moved into a new neighborhood. It's a nice suburban area where people smile at you when you walk by, but we hadn't met many neighbors yet. Yesterday, we got a handwritten invite in our mailbox for a welcome to the neighborhood dinner at 7 p.m. It was signed by Karen and Mike from across the street. Sweet, right? We showed up at their house with a bottle of wine and a plate of brownies I baked. Karen opened the door, looking surprised, but she quickly smiled and welcomed us in. Their home was gorgeous, with this big open-plan kitchen, and there were already a few people chatting and sipping wine. It seemed a bit formal, but I thought maybe people just dressed up more here. Things started feeling off almost immediately. The conversations were polite but awkward, like no one knew what to say. Someone mentioned how brave we were to come. I laughed it off, thinking it was about moving during the holidays, but the atmosphere stayed weird. Karen seemed distracted, and Mike barely spoke to us. After dinner, Karen stood up, raised her glass and made a toast. Here's to forgiveness, fresh starts, and moving forward. Everyone clapped, and I awkwardly joined in. Then Karen turned to us and said, I hope this evening shows we hold no grudges. Matt and I just stared at her. Grudges?
What?
I had no idea what she meant, but before I could ask, someone else chimed in about how much work this dinner must have been for Karen. I tried to pivot the conversation to the brownies we brought, but Karen cut me off and said, Oh, we've had enough surprises for one night. It felt like every comment had this underlying tension, but I couldn't figure out why. When dessert came, Matt leaned over and whispered, Are you sure we're at the right house? I froze. I didn't even think to check the address. I excused myself, claiming I needed to use the restroom, and found an envelope on their counter addressed to Karen and Mike, but at a different house number across the street from our house. We were at the wrong house, and judging by the awkward energy, a very wrong house. First update. The moment I saw the address on the envelope, my heart dropped. I felt my cheeks go hot as I realized Karen and Mike weren't being weird. They were probably just as confused as we were. But now I couldn't leave the bathroom. How do you recover from crashing a stranger's dinner party? I took a deep breath, told myself to act natural, and walked back into the dining room. Matt looked at me expectantly, and I gave him the smallest shake of my head. His face went pale. Karen was in the middle of talking about her journey to healing when I sat back down. Healing from what? I had no idea. She gestured toward us and said, And to think, just a few months ago, I never imagined we'd all be sitting here together. A few people murmured in agreement. One guy even raised his glass to us like we were the stars of the night. I whispered to Matt, We're leaving after dessert. He nodded, gripping his wine glass like it was a lifeline. Then things got weirder. One of the other guests, an older woman in pearls, leaned over to me and whispered, You know, it's very brave of you to show up after everything. Karen was so upset at first, but I told her, You have to let it go. Let what go? I gave a weak smile and nodded, not knowing what else to do. Matt, sensing my panic, tried to steer the conversation by asking Mike about their house renovations. Mike gave a curt answer about installing new hardwood floors and then, out of nowhere, said, Of course, we wouldn't have had to if someone hadn't ruined the first set. He stared straight at Matt. My husband nearly choked on his drink. Karen, clearly sensing the tension, cut in quickly. Mike, we agreed not to rehash all that tonight. It's a new beginning. Then she smiled at me, a tight, polite smile, and said, Would you like some more wine? I nodded furiously. The night dragged on. Karen and Mike kept dropping vague comments that made it clear they thought we were someone else. Meanwhile, the other guests alternated between shooting us sympathetic looks and giving little passive-aggressive digs. Matt and I were too terrified to correct anyone, especially since they were clearly working through some drama. Finally, dessert was served, this elaborate cheesecake with fresh berries. Everyone oohed and awed over it, and Karen said, I hope you appreciate how much effort went into this. It's not every day we host people who, she trailed off, giving us a pointed look, and I felt like I was going to melt into the chair. As soon as everyone finished eating, I grabbed Matt's arm and whispered, We need to go. Now. We made up some excuse about needing to let the dog out, we don't even have a dog, and hurriedly thanked Karen and Mike for the lovely evening. Karen gave us an awkward hug and said, "It's nice to finally close this chapter." Close what chapter? I didn't stick around to find out. The moment we got home, I Googled Karen and Mike, neighborhood name drama. Nothing came up. Matt and I sat on the couch, staring at each other in silence. What on earth had we just been a part of? Second update. After a restless night of replaying every awkward moment from the dinner, I woke up determined to figure out what exactly we had stumbled into. Matt wanted to let it go, but I couldn't. There was something about Karen's pointed comments and the guests' cryptic remarks that gnawed at me. Who were we supposed to be? And what chapter were they closing? That morning, I decided to go full Nancy Drew. Step 1. Find the real Karen in Mike's house. I walked across the street, as the invite had said, and found a house that matched the description. It was smaller than the one we'd been in, but still lovely, with a garden out front and a wreath on the door. I knocked hesitantly, clutching the same plate of brownies I'd baked the day before. I figured they could double as a peace offering. A man in his 40s answered, and I introduced myself. "Hi, I'm from across the street. Are you Mike?" His face lit up. "Oh, you must be Matt's wife. We've been meaning to come say hello." Relief washed over me. Finally, someone who did know who we were. I handed him the brownies, and we chatted for a minute before Karen appeared. She was warm and bubbly. Nothing like the tense, passive-aggressive Karen from the night before. I realized immediately that we'd gone to the wrong house. But before I could confess, Karen said, "We're so sorry about the mix-up with the invites. Mike accidentally dropped a few in the wrong mailboxes. Did you get one?" My heart skipped a beat. Yeah, actually. We thought it was for last night." Karen frowned. "Oh no, it's for next weekend." "Wait, where did you go?" I hesitated, but I couldn't lie. We went to the house 2 doors down. Big open kitchen. They were hosting a dinner too. Karen's face fell, and Mike let out a low whistle. "Oh, you mean the Hendersons? That's unfortunate." I immediately asked why. Karen and Mike exchanged a look before she said carefully, "Well, let's just say they've had some issues with other neighbors. They moved here after a big falling out in their old neighborhood." I pressed her for details, but she only said, "You might want to avoid them. They're complicated." Complicated? That didn't even begin to explain the bizarre evening we'd had. I thanked them for the clarification and left, more confused than ever. But now I had a name to go on. The Hendersons. Back at home, I scoured Facebook and our local neighborhood group for any mention of them. It didn't take long to find a few posts. They'd moved in about 6 months ago, and judging by the comments, their arrival had stirred up quite a bit of gossip. Apparently, they'd sued their old HOA over a property dispute, and won, but not before alienating their entire street. One post even said, "The Hendersons don't forgive or forget. Be careful around them." My stomach dropped. Forgiveness? Fresh starts? Was last night's dinner some kind of weird olive branch? I debated dropping it, but Matt was less than thrilled when I told him about my sleuthing. "Whatever their drama is, we're not a part of it," he said. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were somehow involved. And then 2 days later, a letter arrived in our mailbox. It was addressed to us but signed by Karen Henderson. It read, "We're so glad you came to dinner. It was a big step for us all. Let's keep the momentum going. How about coffee next week?" Matt looked at me, horrified. "What do we do now?" Third update. So, things have definitely taken a turn. After receiving Karen's letter, Matt and I sat down and debated what to do next. He was adamant about staying out of whatever drama the Hendersons had going on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were involved whether we liked it or not. Why would they invite us if they didn't think we were someone else? And what did she mean by keeping the momentum going? I decided to meet with Karen for coffee. Maybe it was the curious side of me, or maybe I was just desperate to get to the bottom of this mess, but I agreed to the meeting. It was set for the following week, at a cozy local cafe. The day arrived, and I walked in feeling like I was about to step into a trap. Karen was already there, sitting at a corner table with a steaming cup of tea. She waved me over with a big smile. Her outfit was bright, cheery, nothing like the somber hostess from last weekend. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, standing up to give me a warm hug. I hugged her back but couldn't shake the feeling that this was all part of some elaborate scheme. We sat down, and after some casual small talk, I decided to dive right in. "So, Karen, about that dinner the other night." I feel like there's something I'm missing. Why did you think we were, well, someone else? Her smile faltered for a second, but she recovered quickly. Oh, sweetie, I knew something was off. You weren't the people I invited, but you seemed so kind I thought I'd just roll with it. But I'm sure you were wondering why we were all acting so strange. I nodded, relieved that she was finally acknowledging the awkwardness. But then she continued, we just didn't want to be rude. You seemed like the kind of people who could handle a little mix-up. I'm sure we were all a little tense, but we were all really just trying to get through it. I was still lost. Get through what? Karen hesitated, and then in a lower voice she said, the Hendersons have a complicated past. We didn't expect you to show up, but I think the universe had a hand in it. At this point, I was more confused than ever. I needed clarity, and Karen seemed to sense it. She leaned forward and spoke quietly, like she was about to reveal some kind of big secret. The people you think you are, they're not just neighbors. They're our old friends, who are also very much not friends anymore. A long time ago, there was a huge falling out between them and us. Some legal issues, a fight over property rights, and accusations flying both ways. It's been years, but those old grudges still haunt us, and when we saw you at dinner, we thought you were them. My stomach dropped. Were we really that similar to these people? So you thought we were your old friends? Karen nodded. Yes. You two have the same look, the same vibe. You don't look alike, but there's something in your energy. That's why Mike and I didn't know how to react at first. You were like ghosts from our past. I was reeling, trying to process everything she'd said. And then I asked the question that had been nagging at me for days. Why invite us to your dinner if you thought we were these people? She looked a bit embarrassed but shrugged. Honestly, I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't want to be rude, so I just went with it. It was too weird to call off the dinner, and I didn't want to risk insulting you, but after seeing you both, I couldn't let it go. I knew you weren't them, but I had no idea what to say. Matt and I were just two people trying to settle into a new neighborhood. We had nothing to do with this decades-old drama. Yet here we were, caught in the crossfire of something neither of us understood. Before I could think of anything else to ask, Karen stood up. I'm sorry about all the confusion, but I hope we can still be friends. We're just trying to start fresh, you know? Let's not dwell on it. She smiled brightly again, but there was a hint of unease in her eyes. I stood up too, still in a haze, and thanked her for the coffee. But as I walked out of the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Fourth update. Okay, so this whole situation just keeps spiraling. After my coffee with Karen, I thought I had at least a bit of clarity, until, well, I didn't. Sure, she'd explained some of the tension with the Hendersons and their old friends, but I still couldn't understand how this all connected to us. Why were we, mere strangers, being dragged into this mess? That night, Matt and I talked it over. He agreed that we should just distance ourselves from the Hendersons, but I couldn't let it go. If there was a chance we were accidentally part of some deep neighborhood history, I wanted to know more. I had to find out who these old friends were and what really went down. So I did what any semi-rational person would do. I went snooping. I visited the local library. Yes, I went full detective mode and dug through old town records, online forums, and social media groups. After some searching, I came across something that made my blood run cold. The Hendersons' old friends weren't just people who lived down the street. They were part of a much larger, darker tale involving two families who had once been close but had fallen apart after a major conflict. And the kicker? It wasn't just a neighborhood spat. It was tied to a series of questionable legal battles that had made local headlines years ago. These families had been involved in an ongoing property dispute, which had ended in court, with allegations of fraud, manipulation, and even accusations of a home invasion. It seemed absurd. How could this all be tied to the simple suburban neighborhood I had just moved into? The more I dug, the more I realized that the Hendersons weren't just dealing with old grudges. They were still trying to win back their reputation in the community. According to the posts I found, they had lost most of their friends after the dispute, and from there, things had gone downhill. But the most chilling part? Their old friends, the ones they thought Matt and I were, had been part of that very same lawsuit. I had to know if we were truly tangled up in all of this, or if I was just reading too much into things. So I did something bold. The next day, I invited the Hendersons over to our house. I didn't tell Matt ahead of time. I figured he might lose it if I mentioned it. But by the time Karen and Mike showed up, I had to come clean about everything I'd learned. I started with the property dispute, then told them about the weird dinner party, the awkward comments, and the letter. They were quiet for a long time. Mike, in particular, seemed to be chewing on his words. When he finally spoke, it was in a low, serious tone. "You need to understand something," he said, looking directly at me. "We never meant for you to be caught up in this. When we invited you to dinner, we truly thought you were them." Karen nodded, her face tense. "I know it doesn't make sense, but the history between us and them is so tangled. It's hard to explain. We're just trying to start over, to make things right, but sometimes the past keeps following us." I stared at them, still processing everything. "But we don't have any ties to those families. We just moved here, looking for a fresh start ourselves." Mike leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "I know. And that's why I think we might be making a mistake. I'm worried that the more we try to fix things with the past, the more we'll lose sight of our future." Karen gave me a weak smile. "I'm sorry for the confusion. I didn't want to drag you into this, but when you showed up at our door, I just didn't know how to handle it. You look like them, you remind us of them, and it's so hard to move on when you're constantly reminded of everything that went wrong." I realized, in that moment, that they weren't just apologizing for the dinner misstep. They were apologizing for dragging us into their unresolved drama, trying to reconcile their past mistakes by unknowingly projecting them onto us. Matt walked in at that moment, and he could tell the conversation had gotten heavy. He joined us at the table, and I filled him in on everything I had discovered. Mike and Karen seemed relieved to finally open up about the truth, but it wasn't the closure we'd hoped for. As the conversation continued, it was clear that while they wanted to move on, they didn't know how to leave their history behind. Their unresolved pain was still fresh, and they were still trying to make peace with the people they had once called friends. As the evening wound down, Karen asked, "So, are we still okay? I know this is a lot to take in, but we really do want to make this right with you too. It's just hard, you know." I looked at Matt, who nodded, and we both agreed. We couldn't change the past for them, but we could move forward together. It wasn't a perfect solution, but maybe it was a start. Maybe we could all figure out how to live in the present, without the weight of history pulling us down. I'm not sure if the Hendersons will ever fully let go of their past, but for now they know we're not the people they thought we were. And maybe, just maybe, we're all learning how to let go of old ghosts together. This story feels like it's finally over, but who knows? Maybe there are still more twists waiting in the wings.